Pursuant to General Law C-30A 20B, following the Governor's declaration of a state of emergency in the Commonwealth arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, the committee will meet virtually utilizing Zoom technology. All votes will be taken by a roll call vote. So, Adam Amon.
Present.
Gina Stino.
Present.
Mike Barclay.
Present.
Fran Collins.
Present.
Rob Hillman is a no at the moment. Patrick Kennedy.
Here.
Mark Maggi.
Present.
Mary McGoldrick is here, and Meg Wheeler will not be joining us tonight. So first up on our docket, and Mike, I'm sure if you would like to add anything along the way, is Chief Sylvia, as far as I know, to present the fire budget to us. So we guess we will wait for Chris to in there. He is like magic. Hello.
Good evening. Actually, John Dockeray will be doing the budget presentation tonight.
Okay.
I'm here as his assistant on this case, and
Okay.
as part of the institutional knowledge. So if we give him just a minute, hopefully he will pop up here, Mary.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Thank you for joining us.
And there he is.
See, again, like magic.
All you have to do is say their names.
I know.
Beetlejuice 1 and 2. Say their names or they appear.
You know,
You can do it 3 times, Gene. You only have to do it once.
good evening, everyone.
Good
Thanks
evening.
for having
Thanks
us
for joining
tonight. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint up. Can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Mary, you may have to give him the ability to share.
Let's see. I need to figure out how to do that.
Chris can do it.
Chris, if you're still there and you could give John screen sharing.
All set.
Thank you.
Can you see the PowerPoint now?
Not yet.
Can you see it now?
No.
Oh, hold on.
Don't have any little kids show you how to do that, John?
No, I got it now. Nope.
There you go.
All right. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
All right. So you can see it now?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. All right, so let's start. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mike. I guess he sat in for Chief Sylvia and I last week. Gave you a little quick overview. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay. Oh, boy. Little technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay, so our operating budget for FY23 is broken into 3 categories: salaries, overtime, and expenses. We have the administrative staff salary, and then we'll have the operating line operating salary. So initially, chief of the department is the projected salary, a budget salary, $173,289. That's per contract. And the assistant chief of department, $131,027. This includes a step raise and a 2% COLA, which has a total administrative salary of $304,000 and $316. Tongue-tied there, sorry. Our operational staff, we have 24 members, which operate in 4 groups: the captain, lieutenant, and 4 firefighters. Their salaries are determined by the collective bargaining agreement between the town and Local 2804. Their contract expired in June of 2021, and they're currently in negotiations with the town at this time. a breakdown of the salaries per the members for the 4 captains, the 4 lieutenants, and the firefighters as they break down. Any questions on the salaries, just the line items, the salaries of the individuals?
I'd just say, Chief, that this is that page you showed was part of the handout that went to the committee last week too. So they saw that total of the 1,828,342 last week as well.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
And if I could jump in real quick before we jump out of that, just so you're aware, obviously the administrative staff salaries, the chief's contract will have to be negotiated. That was my contract numbers. So the expectation is it'll probably be slightly less than that. And the assistant chief of departments is part of the new management bylaw or whatever that they put in place. Before Miriam left, we discussed where we were going to put the assistant chief of department in there, and that's where that 131,027 comes from, and that includes base salary plus paid holidays. So that's where the whole total number is, and it does include a COLA of 2% for FY23.
So Chiefs, so for budget purposes, since we don't have known contract numbers for fiscal 23, we're just using the existing numbers as a budget item through until they're known, correct?
So the number for the assistant chief is probably the number that will get used, Patrick.
Okay.
The number for the excuse me, for the chief of department, obviously that's an unknown, and I expect that it will be less.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. And then on this slide here is just the general breakdown totals of all the salaries for the department compared to the individual line items that I showed before. So we showed total salaries of $2,256,856. And then we'll move on to our next category, which is overtime. The 4 categories that drive our overtime: administrative leave, bereavement leave, callback, storm coverage, fire prevention, injury, jury duty, mechanic, military coverage, personal day leave, sick leave, paramedic coverage, department vacancies, and training. Just a sub part of the training overtime. Part of the collective bargaining is the paramedics have to recertify every 2 years, which is approximately 60 hours or 60 continued Con Ed hours. We only have 2 basic EMTs. They have to do about 30, but one of them, as you know, is going to be retiring shortly. The other 2, our overtime training is we try to conduct live fire training. Boston Fire Academy has been very gracious to allow us to go up and train at their facility, which we'll be doing in the end of April. Also, Meijer driver training. We alternate 1 year. They do a sim trailer comes to the town, which we'll be doing again in April. And the other times we use a parking lot and do actual hands-on training, going through courses that are set up with cones. Superior officer training, when we have members get promoted up, we send them to the Mass Fire Academy for Officer 1, Officer 2 training. And we also have a couple of members that will also be hopefully attending some fire prevention training to supplement the fire prevention department.
Great.
So
Fran,
overtime request.
excuse me, John, 1 second.
Go ahead.
Fran, you had a question?
Yeah, on the callback compensation, is that door to door or is that from the time you arrive at the firehouse?
So it's when they're called in.
Yeah.
So as soon as they're called in, they're on the clock, and then they notify us they're in the station, and they remain until the incident has been resolved.
All right, so if they live in Holbrook or Wareham, then they're on the whole time they're on the road, they're on the clock.
So yeah, usually we don't have anyone where lives in Wareham, It's mostly the individuals that live within 30 to 40 minutes that we're getting responses from.
Yeah.
So we're losing, we're paying about, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of the hourly rate until they get to the station.
Yeah, I just grabbed those town names out of the air. I didn't know. Yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other
On
questions?
that line, also, Fran, the callback works as a 3-hour minimum, once they're called to come back to the station. So very seldom does it run past that 3 hours, and that's a contractual obligation. So even if they're driving 45 minutes in and they stay for 2 hours, they still only get that 3-hour minimum that is contractually obligated.
Oh, good, Bob. Thanks for that clarification.
No problem.
Jean?
I just have a point of interest here. How many of our firefighters are subject to USERA time off? Military service where they need time
okay.
off and there's overtime involved. Just curiosity.
So we do have one member who's an active member of the National Guard,
Okay.
and he has been deployed for the COVID relief for probably 18 months now.
Wow.
We did have him back for 2 months during those 18 months. I don't have that off the top of my head, Gene.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I don't have that. We do lose him if we were in a non-COVID situation. Depending how the schedule falls, we lose him one weekend a month, and then
Okay.
is 2 weeks a year for his training. Okay, so we just
Great.
have one member. He has approximately 3 years left of active duty, and then he says he plans to retire. So.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't see everybody on the screen, so if there's any other questions and you wanted to raise your hand on the taskbar on the bottom, that would be helpful because then you'd pop up to the top. All right, seeing none, carry on, John.
Thank you. So you guys jumped ahead of me a little bit, but here's the overtime request, hours, and how we reimburse those hours. So like administratively, 6 hours a week. Our EMS captain does approximately 3 hours a week of billing and reviewing patient care reports to make sure they're meeting the proper standards of treatment. Then we also have a records officer who's reviewing the incident reports and making sure they're being filled out. Then we get forwarded to the state fire marshal's office. Bereavement leave, that's been what we've used in past years. Callback, as you can see, past years, we've used about 2,000 or 2,100 hours of callback. We don't budget for any storm, fire prevention, injury, or jury duty. Mechanic, again, past years, approximately just over 200 hours of mechanical overtime. Oh, military coverage, there we go, Gene. So 244 hours in the past, but now with this activation, it'd probably be higher, those hours, okay?
Right. Thank you.
Personal day, 576 hours. That's all by contractual. And then sick leave coverage, we're looking at 1,700 hours a year annually for coverage. And then down towards live fire training, 240 hours. Pump training, that's another training. We, through a regional grant, we secured a pump training device that includes Situate, Cohasset, Hull, Norwell, and Hingham. And now with this device, we can perform annual pump training with our members. And don't worry, and we don't need to hire a third-party service to come in and perform that training for us. Part of the grant is that we are training members to become train-the-trainers on how to use the device. So that will even save some more money. The Meijer driver training, again, 96 hours, and professional development for our captains and lieutenants. And as we've said, paramedic recertification, 960 hours. And again, each member has to do 60 hours in a 2-year period. So you figure they're doing 30 hours a year So with those total hours and with the actual overtime rate that's still in use because the contract isn't settled, that brings us out to request of $376,903. Any questions on the overtime request? Okay. Next
Before
is-
you move on, Chief Dockery, I just wanted to mention
Sure.
one thing, and obviously, you see the callback number. The department, I always, this is like my annual plea, that so everybody understands exactly where this stands. As I end my career, I will tell you, when I began my career, 95% of the firefighters lived in the town of Cohasset. So callback was not a problem. I lived on the wrong side of the hillside, and I couldn't beat Ralph Parancello and Hot Sullivan to the firehouse. So they were the ones that got the callback. Friends smiling on those names. I just saw that. Now, legitimately, the only two members of the Cohasset Fire Department that live in the town of Cohasset are John Dockery and Bob Sylvia. And Bob Sylvia is going to retire. So that's going to leave John Dockery by himself. The problem with that is that obviously it takes time to get our staff back, whenever it might be. So if we need to call them back for a fire or to cover for the ambulance being out of town, it does take time. And on a very quick breakdown, we have approximately 15 out of the 23 members at the present time that live within 30 minutes of the firehouse. The closest ones are, in Situate at 7 and 10 minutes away. So it's something we as a community have to look at. I've said this every year, that we've managed to get away with this staffing model for 40 years. But it's just something to be aware of. It is, again, and when I tell you that, I can give you the gory details, but 40 years ago, there were 3 firehouses and everybody lived within 5 or 6 minutes of a firehouse. Now there's one, and the folks that live up in Beechwood next to Gene are 10 to 12 minutes out on a blue sky day. So it is what it is. We've got a decrease in the level of service, and we run with less people than we did 40 years ago. So, and we do more business and generate more revenue. So it's just one of those things that I'm not going to bore you with all of these details, but if you have questions in regards to that stuff, I'm around at least for another month and change. So please reach out, and I'd be very happy to explain exactly how all of that breaks down. But it is a challenge that the town of Cohasset's going to face as we move forward.
Thank you, Chief. Adam, you have a question?
Yeah, so taking that into consideration, has there ever been a thought of having volunteer firefighters or volunteer EMT individuals that are physically located in Cohasset that are willing to help?
So Adam, that's a great question. And I come from we called them call firefighters in the town of Cohasset back in the day. And my father was a call firefighter. The reason we were able to get away, well, on top of the 28 career firefighters, we had a call force of about 40 people. We used to have a lot of fires. That was before fire prevention efforts kind of helped dwindle that. But the problem became that, very simply, my father owned his own business, and he thought nothing at all of dropping his tools to help out the town of Cohasset. And most of the other guys who were on that call fire department were tradesmen, own their small businesses, whatever the case may be. What happened very simply was, I can tell you that my plumber charges me $135 an hour, and my electrician charges me $200 an hour. They're not very willing to drop their tools and come run to help us. That was part of it. So the history of it is that the call force through the 80s started to dwindle down to a very few members. And in the early 90s, the fire chief that was here at the time went through a monster effort to try and to bring up the call fire department again. And we were only able to basically recruit 12 people. And out of those, there's only a few that are left. And in addition to that, all of the standards have changed in regards to training. So the number of hours that are required if you want to be a call firefighter to be trained properly has increased drastically. So it's been more and more difficult to try and recruit call firefighters and to train them and to have them available to us as needed. So pretty much, you know, and again, if I go back historically, all the departments had a fairly substantial call fire department. I'm talking Hingham, Norwell, Cohasset, Hull, and Situate. And right now, I believe there are no call firefighters in Hull. There are none in Hingham. There are a few in Norwell. There are none in Situate, and there's a few in Cohasset. So there have been efforts to do that, but unfortunately, it's just been a difficult thing to try and do.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Mark, question?
Do these neighboring towns similarly struggle with getting firefighters that live in town?
The only one right now that's the recruitment and retention of especially paramedics, Mark, is another very good question. The town of Hull is the only one that at the present time is been able to hire kids from Hull. We like to say Hull kids. Kids from Cohasset don't want to be paramedics. They want to be doctors. God bless them all. And, you know, Hingham has kind of struggled with the same thing. There are very few, all the communities around us are kind of in the same situation. Very few, I would say, members of the departments, as far as career department members, are living in town. It's becoming more and more difficult for them to do that as the prices have increased in most of the communities. But yeah, that's part of the issue. And that's something, you know, now that you've asked that question, that's something that we as a community are going to have to start to think about is the recruiting and retaining of good talent. I can tell you this, that we, the community, are blessed by the level of paramedicine that is provided to us. We have some incredibly talented people. They are very hard on each other. Mike has heard this from me a couple times. They are very hard on each other. They ride each other very hard. And as I said, it's a great group of folks. Unfortunately, if you draw a line from Braintree through Weymouth to Quincy, everybody south of that runs a fire department paramedic ambulance. So all of us are trying to recruit from the same pool of candidates. The pool of candidates, especially during COVID, has dwindled, becoming more and more difficult to recruit. And my fear as far as retention goes is that civil service just opened the door by deciding that they're going to run a test every single year. So there's no reason why somebody that's on Department A can't go and take a test, score very highly, and be hired by Department B. Because it's closer to home, it's better pay, whatever the case may be. So that's when I talk about the retention. I see that's something that we're all going to struggle with, not just here in Cohasset, but all the departments are going to struggle with that as we move forward in the next few years. It's everybody's gone that route. As far as paramedics, partly because obviously better service, but also by the amount of revenue that we generate. Last year, I believe our revenue number for the last calendar year was $400,000 generated back to the general fund in paramedic revenue or ambulance transport revenue. And we're just, we're smaller than others. So obviously Situate, Hingham, Hull's numbers are actually bigger than ours. So that's another part of this puzzle, that I don't see the paramedic services going anywhere. And there's been thoughts, and we looked into it a bunch of years ago, about maybe going to a private service instead, because maybe it would be cheaper. And when we ran through that process, what we discovered was that we don't generate enough revenue to make a for-profit business work. So they would come into us and say, okay, we're going to take all your revenue and we're going to charge you X number, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put an ambulance in your community. So when we ran that number, I believe that was late 90s, early 2000. I believe Mr. Haddad was around at that point, for those that remember those days. It was deemed to be not worthy. It was a little bit less than a push but it just didn't seem right to decrease the amount of available staff to fight a fire because we were going to try and run a private ambulance service. Now, I know I'm a little long-winded, but hopefully I answered the question.
No, I appreciate it. Just sitting here trying to think of creative ways to recruit and retain local talent.
And Mark, I'd love to sit there and talk to you about it at any point, because that's legitimately one of my biggest fears is these kids live as far away. You know, I look at the list and I've got guys that are in Halifax and you know, well, they're outside the area because that's where they can afford to live. And I know I've talked to the affordable housing folks about this issue too. And I don't know if that's something that down the road we can start looking at, but it's going to be a struggle for, and I'm going to say Cohasset's not going to be alone in it, but we all know what it costs to live in the town of Cohasset. So as I mentioned, the town of Hull might have it a little easier than we do, and they're managing to hire from within.
Okay, any other questions?
Sorry, Chief Doctor, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem, Chief. No problem. All right. So we can move on to expenses. Okay. So expenses, instead of going line by line, as you can see, I'm just gonna hit the ones that we're looking for increases in. So we're looking for an increase in our expenses of $29,150. And I'll start with the first one will be line item 5245, which is vehicle maintenance. Vehicle maintenance, we are going to lose our mechanic sometime in this current year, this calendar year, and we don't have anyone to replace him. So we're going to have to shipping out apparatus to the dealership for repairs. So instead of paying an overtime rate in the 50s for a member on staff, we're going to be paying shop rates at probably about $125 an hour. So that's gonna affect our vehicle maintenance costs. Okay. The other thing too, as I talked about it in the overtime for the mechanic duties, but we're gonna have to also pay individuals to take vehicles to repair shops and pick them up and bring them back. So we're gonna see some vehicle maintenance costs increase in this coming for fiscal 23. Next one is 5250, which is equipment maintenance. Let's see, what's driving that is increase in the hydraulic extrication tools. We've got to do some annual testing and maintenance on them, and that's driving the cost up a little bit there. Next up, 5255, radio maintenance. Our portable radios that we purchased through a grant in 2017 are starting to show some wear and tear. We also have a mobile radio that we need to replace in one of the command vehicles. So that's what we're looking for. That's what's driving that. That's looking at a $6,000 cost increase for fiscal 23. Next one would be line 5318, contract services. We're seeing an increase with contract services. We're looking at our ambulance billing in 2020, and we weren't as busy when COVID first initially arrived. We started to pick up in 2021. And so our contract services with Comstar, our ambulance billing company, we've seen an increase because our ambulance is back to being busy again. Also, emergency inspections. When we go out for an electrical issue that we can't resolve, especially inside a house, we need to call for the wire inspector. And same thing also if we go for a plumbing issue, mostly it's gas appliances that we can't secure or that needs to be taken out of service, immediately we call for a plumbing inspector. And so we've seen an increase in their rates for when they come out to assist us on scene. Next increase would be line 5527. Firefighting protective gear. One of the things to complete our cancer prevention for the fire service. In the past, we purchased turnout pants and coats so members can wash their gear after coming back from a fire or any kind of incident where their gear can be contaminated. We haven't replaced gloves. So we need to not replace, but issue another set of pair of gloves so that they can wash their gloves, they can dry their gloves, and also have another set to go with their other set of protective personal equipment so that they're ready to go and be deployed in case they're still on duty and their first set is contaminated and waiting to be washed. Okay. Any questions on those items that I've discussed? Yes, Fran.
Yeah, the in-house maintenance for the PM, for instance, grease jobs, oil changes, filter changes, can that be done at the station while the apparatus is in service? And I don't mean that you're going to run down the street with trying to pour oil in it, but have you considered that? It's not a company like On Site can come and do all those trucks right in one spot and get it done.
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at that, but that can be done at the station, but we just have to look at that, what their cost is and see if those, some of those services won't work on fire trucks because of the liability. So we used to have a repair shop in Marshfield that we'd bring equipment to, and their liability insurance carrier said, no more fire trucks. Can't work on any fire trucks. So.
Oh, that's what's the name down there by the sand pit.
Yeah, you got it. Yep. Yeah, that was great because we don't have to go, an hour, half hour
Right.
down and back. So that's one of the big thing is liability working on fire apparatus.
Oh my
So we
God.
have to make sure that they can work on the apparatus.
All right, thank you. I'm just thinking of all the regular PM that can be done in-house that you don't have to send the truck away, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
thanks,
no,
John.
we're working on that, Fran. We're looking at options. Right now, we're very, very lucky that we can borrow the mechanic from Situate Fire to help us out. But he's busy. He has his own apparatus he has to deal with, and he's got a young family, so we really can't be relying on him all the time. But we do have a backup for now. But for long range, we've got to find a good service for that.
All right, thanks, John.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. And then let me just move to 5,800, which is the capital. This is the capital expenses that also fall below $10,000 that don't meet the threshold of going in front of the Capital Budget Committee. And the biggest driver here is we're looking to replace a stair chair that's helped to carry people down from second floors at medical aids. And this chair we're looking to replace is approximately 15 years old. And it has special tracks on it that allows members to bring people downstairs without hurting backs and shoulders. Like I said, replacing a device that's 15 years old and that we've had to use once, and we end up having 2 back injuries from using that device. So that's why we're looking to replace that. So in general, that's the budget in a nutshell. So a total budget request for fiscal 23 is $2,899,169. So any questions?
Mike, is there anything that you'd like to add, since I know you've spent time with both chiefs?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, remind everyone, these are the numbers we saw last week when we talked about this. And while, you might look at the percentage increase and say it's a big year-over-year percentage increase. Some of these items like the gloves, for instance, that is they're asking for that for this year, but it's not going to be needed next year. So the bump up this year, is for a lot of items that aren't going to be necessarily structurally in their budget, next year and the year after. Would that be a fair way to characterize that, Chiefs?
Yes, yes.
Terrific. Any other questions? And then I'm going to pass the torch to Mr. Hillman. Yes, Fran.
I think it's a pretty fair rendition of what you need. Nothing out of the ordinary there. I think you guys done a good job. Keep it up.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Franny.
Yep.
Thank you, Chiefs.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
And before I run off, some of you guys have been at this for quite a while. Some of you are new to this. Some of you have been put up with some of these presentations from me for years. All I want to say is thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you. And, I'm not, as I said, April 22nd is the end of it, but it's been a pleasure working for the town and to work with the boards and the committees because I get paid to do this. I can't say that to you. So if you have any questions post, please reach out to Chief Dockery. He's worked really hard on this FY23 budget and he's got most of the answers. And if it's anything that has to do with history, such as the question about the call firefighters or the paramedic service or anything like that. I've had a starring role in that movie for 42 years, so I'm very happy to talk about it whenever need be.
Hey, Bobby, I remember when you had hair on top of your head, not just under your nose.
There are some people who remember when my hair reached my shoulders, but we'd rather not talk about that, okay?
Thank you very much, Chief Sylvia. We're going to miss you.
Thank
We
you.
are. We're going to follow
Thanks,
you
Chief.
on your bike.
There you go.
All righty. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chiefs.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks. I was able to listen in on about the last 15 minutes of that. I literally just pulled in from the airport after 4 days in New Orleans. So draw your own conclusions, but I will do my best to conduct this meeting. I do have some, after town meeting's over, I have some very, very pointed recommendations for Cohasset nightlife, but we'll get to them. We'll get to them when the time comes, which is probably never. So, Mary, thanks for handling last night, and thanks for handling the fire portion of this. The temptation to dial in last night in a really inappropriate from a really inappropriate place was high, but I resisted it. So we're on to the IT budget presentation. We're more or less on schedule, and I know we got a lot of materials, and I know that Ron is always very thorough in a good way. So why don't we turn it over to Ron, and if Don or Chris have anything to add, be happy to hear from them. Ron, good evening. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice seeing everyone. I'm glad you were able to attend this meeting. It's an important one for IT this year. There's a lot going on in Cohasset, a lot of projects, a critical year with regards to refreshing our infrastructure. We have a lofty goal with regards to capital totaling close to $600,000. That's going to replace a lot of our network switching gear, firewalls, a number of different appliances and services that will bring Cohasset, into the next 5 or 10 years with regards to technology. In the process of upgrading that solution and that backbone that Cohasset relies on, we'll also be recapturing some of that capacity to extend that connectivity as needs arise going forward. Some of those needs might be public safety, some additional municipal locations that we might want to light up at some point in time. So there's a number of different projects and initiatives that are out there that this project is key to moving forward with. The capital project, if I can start there, is a prelude this year to a second phase, which we'll be asking for additional funding next year. Our intentions are to eliminate one of our data centers and go to the cloud, Microsoft Azure, in fact, with our second data center. There we will find cost savings of about $200,000 over 5 years, I believe it was. We will capture some additional labor hours that we are struggling to find right now. We have deployed over 100 cloud-based solutions in the 5 or 6 years that I've been here. So when we built it, they came. It was amazing to see the schools and the municipal sector leverage this infrastructure in the way it was designed. Going forward, to have the resiliency and redundancy, to have the continuance of operations solution that we need to have in place, will all be achieved with this phase 1 and phase 2 approach. So again, a lofty goal, one that sets Cohasset up well into the future to be able to be flexible in the solutions that it adopts, to offer services in ways that we potentially may not necessarily realize now, but we'll have the capacity to do it in the future just because of the way the infrastructure is built. This is a pretty exciting time for Cohasset and for IT, to be honest with you. These projects don't come along every day. And, you know, this is something that everybody's getting behind. It's really exciting. We really have our teeth into this one. And again, it's a cornerstone for Cohasset going forward. So that's pretty much our capital ask with regards to the next year or two. With regards to operational budgets, we'll be talking about budget 156 and 155. If you care to turn to 156, that's really a municipal budget. That is a budget that is primarily $133,000, I believe, is targeted just for software solutions for the municipal sector. That includes fire, police, DPW, all of those municipal departments. So there isn't a lot that has changed in that budget with regards to new ask. In fact, there is nothing in that budget that has changed from last year, with the exception of some additional overhead associated with SLA costs. So the support contracts that we have with our vendors, our software providers, that cost has gone up by about $7,000, I believe. So that is really the only highlight that I can point to in that particular budget. Again, not all of the software within Cohasset is within the 156 budget. There is some, I believe, HR software that may not necessarily land in that budget that you might want to be cognizant of. There might be some treasure collector software that might be in there in their own dedicated budget. But primarily, we try to capture everything in the 156 budget. And if we don't capture it from a funding perspective, we are definitely looking at it from an integration perspective. So I'm aware of these other software solutions that we have out there to the degree that we might want to integrate those with our document management system that we spun up a few years ago. There's a lot of opportunities there to advance the town in making many paper manual processes now digital and introduce some automation in that. Again, a very exciting time, because this is a cornerstone of what Cohasset really needs to move forward with digital services for our constituents and a new way of doing business while capturing, you know, some efficiencies and hopefully some dollars along with it. Very exciting. Any questions on the 156? Okay, the 155, this one gets really interesting. The 155 has a number of different moving parts to it this year. One of the biggest things that I'll suggest is relevant to the 155 budget is a reclassification of our systems administrator, our analyst. We are a central IT department. We manage all processes, while we support all solutions across the entire town, inclusive of schools. Myself, the CIO, and the deputy CIO are paid out of this central infrastructure budget. Excuse me one second. What I'm proposing we do this year is to slide the systems analyst position into the central infrastructure budget with the CIO and deputy CIO positions. The reason I'm asking for that reclassification and to move that funding into that budget is essentially that position really truly is a position that is supporting every single department out there. Kyle supports our virtual network, our virtual servers, all of those components associated with providing a platform or a solution for fire, for police, for the municipal, for the schools. They all reside within the systems that he manages on a daily basis. Every single one of us in IT manage some level of help desk tickets. Even I take help desk tickets at times. That won't change significantly with regards to Kyle. He will still support the school in the amount of help desk tickets that he is currently supporting, but he will have a charge to accent and keep a better eye on the security fabric of those systems. I can tell you that besides that shift from the school budget into the infrastructure budget with that position, the lion's share of the increases that you see in the central infrastructure budget are in fact tied to security. Over the last few years, 4 or 5 years, first, before I go further, did all of you receive the document that Dawn sent today with regards to security and the percentages we've been using? If you saw that document, you realize that 5 years ago, we were only spending 4% of our overall IT budget on security. With everything that we're seeing these days, we can't live with 4% of our overall budget going to just security services. So what we're proposing is, as we have through the last couple of years, increasing the spend on security components and or services to ensure that the cybersecurity threats and the threat landscape that we see as we partner with, MSISAC at the state and some of the other like Homeland Security agencies, when we get feedback from them, we have a good idea of exactly what is coming down the pike, what they're seeing, and we get day-to-day updates as to what we should be doing to ensure that our systems and our data remain safe. Not a single one of us in the IT department out of the 5 of us are dedicated to security, unfortunately, though. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to accent our ability to manage or become more aware of on a daily basis the security analytics and metrics that we see coming from these other locations, as well as our own appliances like our firewalls. Speaking of firewalls, part of the capital budget is to replace firewalls. We have 2 firewalls that are approximately 6 years old. As these firewalls get older, they lose the ability to adopt the latest and greatest software revisions. So the operating systems and the patches and the security enhancements stop happening because they're at end of life. We plan to recover approximately $32,000 out of this operational budget by purchasing new firewalls. So the 2 firewalls that we pay approximately $16,000 annually for will be absorbed in the capital spend. That $16,000 will be available for something else within the IT budget. We also will be sunsetting a filter that the schools use. So the content filter that we use to protect the students, to ensure that they don't end up with malware or viruses or systems are hacked, where we limit the ability to go to certain locations based on our FERPA and COPA requirements, that device will be replaced as well. That device is an annual renewal of about $18,000 to $21,000, and it's going up and up as the device gets older and older. The device has been problematic as of late, so we will be taking that device out of circulation, sunsetting it, and the firewalls will assume the responsibility of the filtering that device currently does. So there's approximately $32,000 in this budget that you're looking at that can be redeployed to something else. let me just look at something real quick. So if we were to contrast last year's fiscal budget for the central infrastructure budget, we see about $112,000 increase from last year to this year. Again, $70,000 is roughly the systems analyst position that we're reclassifying from the schools into the central infrastructure budget. There's another, I've talked about security. There's another component that we're looking at very closely. We haven't landed on a solution yet, and that's called a SOC. So essentially what happens is we pay a third-party provider to install sensors on our network. They look at all of the traffic coming in and out of our firewall and within our network, and they feed that back to a live operating center that evaluates that and immediately identifies whether or not there are issues associated with that based on signatures that they use for malware and viruses and other types of bad actors. They then provide us with information about that so that we can make an immediate remediation of that based on what they found. That's about a $30,000 service. That is a new service that we have in this budget, but we have not landed on a solution because we've been dealing with a couple of vendors and we need to find the right solution. Having said that, we may not necessarily spend that $30,000 because we are getting 2 firewalls that do intrusion detection and intrusion response. So intrusion detection and intrusion response. The ability for us to manage that, to monitor that on a daily basis has to be automated for that to work as well as a SOC would. None of us, as I mentioned, are full-time security on a daily basis. We are all running around wearing multiple hats, taking help desk tickets, looking at strategic plans, evaluating solutions. We're very busy. So we don't dedicate time every single day to looking at our firewall logs. And that's a shortcoming that we're trying to resolve. So by going to a SOC or endorsing these new Fortinet firewalls with intrusion detection and prevention systems involved, if we can automate the notifications of those, we won't need to go to the SOC. We can handle these services in-house through our firewall. But that's an unknown until I actually get those firewalls up and working. So there is an amount of about $28,000 to $30,000 in this budget for network security services that we may or may not need. Questions there?
I saw hands in this order: Patrick, Mike, Mary, Fran.
Thanks, Don, for the detailed materials and explanation tonight. I just want to make sure I fully understand the impact of this shift of an employee cost from the school budget over to the general fund budget, right? First off, is that employee, that systems analyst, is that a union employee? Is there any union impact of shifting an employee within the town budgets this way?
No, he is not tied to a union in his current job, and he would not be tied to a union in the shift when he ended up into the municipal budget.
Okay. Is the shift in cost into the municipal side, how is there a corresponding shift in overall budget from schools to the town side to cover that? Or does that leave $70,000 of additional spend on the school side that now the town is picking up? In other words, is this a shift in cost from school to town fully?
What is being proposed is that $70,000 would stay with the schools. The schools could do what they want with it, but I do have strong feelings with regards to how it should be used for IT. And those strong feelings are tied to front-end classroom hardware and software that is significantly old, that is not enough, that they have no funding or no immediate plan to replace projectors and old digital displays that they have. So I would like the superintendent and the business manager, in fact, we'll be engaging in a conversation about this, to appropriate that money into the IT department so we can rectify or at least create a stopgap for these projectors in classroom solutions that are failing at a higher rate than ever before because of their age.
You good, Mike? Then,
So, Ron, just real quickly, so you talked about the move to Azure, and so as we migrate over to the Azure platform, will that in future years take care of things like money you have to spend on cybersecurity, software updates? Like, does that shift some of the money from capital to operating, in that we're paying Microsoft through Azure to basically make sure we have the latest and greatest technology, and instead of having to do it through the capital budget, it would fall on them through an operating line item? Would that be a fair way to think about that?
That's exactly right. So when you go to Azure, it will be shifting from a capital expense to an operational expense. So we will have to look at building that into the budget as we go. I will say, though, if you look at the master technology plan that was done in the return on investment, the great thing about the Azure environment for us is that you turn your services on and off as needed. So we leave our data centers up and running 24/7, right? Police and fire need them. But there are a lot of processes that happen inside of Cohasset that don't necessarily have to run through the night. So all of that computing, all of that power, all of those resources in an Azure environment get shut off when they're not needed. It's like a metered use kind of thing where you're only using what you use when you use it, and it improves the security because the systems aren't up. So it's really a big win for us.
And as you're skating to kind of where the puck is going on this stuff, do you feel like all of the departments in the town are jumping on the bus with you? It just seems like everything you're doing, we're like one big corporation. We should, everybody should be, part of this migration.
I have communicated and continually communicate these goals to department managers, the town manager, etc. They're aware of what this plan is. There is no apprehension whatsoever with regards to this. Schools have showed no apprehension whatsoever with regards to this. So I think from the perspective of getting the buy-in, I think we have it.
Great, thank you.
Patrick, did you have I saw your hand up.
No, I asked my questions. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mary.
Yes, thanks, Ron. The memo was awesome. Quick question. Have you been before capital budget yet?
I have.
Okay. And was that a nice meeting?
Is it ever nice when you go in front of Capitol?
Nice. Not as nice as us, but always nice.
I had a great time with Capitol this year. I actually brought them up to, and you guys are welcome. You should really come to a little outage in the high school in room 275 where we have our IT department. And I'd like to show you, in fact, I think we actually have it recorded from a few years ago with 143 TV, but we had a display and we showed them all of the systems and how we manage and monitoring them. They were impressed, and it's pretty hard to impress capital budget. So I felt really good. They felt really good at this spend. You do have to realize that, the gear that we have is at end of life. So we have to do something. And this made the most amount of sense across the board from what everybody felt, and so did I.
Great. Another quick question. I just noticed from your memo, so any repair or replacement cycles that you have with equipment that's on the town side is put into your budget, if I'm understanding correctly, as opposed to the school side, which goes through, like their leases for the Chromebooks and things like that seem to run through capital budget requests rather than their operating budget. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm not 100% sure I'm following you, but I will say that, yes, I worked with Susan Owen about the lease on the Chromebooks. We solicited quotes. We gave them the specs that we wanted. Our vendors came back. I worked through the lease. Susan signed off on it. And the money is in fact in the school's capital account.
Okay. And then for the systems administrator, I believe you referred to him as Kyle. Is his office at the schools, at the middle high school?
That is correct.
Okay. And it would stay there?
That is correct.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Fran, and then I see Mike.
Yeah, Ron, I'm overweight and out of date. That's me here for computer stuff, but stuff that goes to the cloud. What goes to the cloud? How secure is it? And how is it kept secure? These clouds are great. There's computer banks somewhere off, who knows where, but all our data and information is stored. How is that protected? Do we have to back up everything that we have here in town before it goes to the cloud? Or maybe you can educate me a little bit about that.
All excellent questions. The cloud is very secure. We have the ability to select the type and location of our cloud. Our cloud would remain in a Microsoft Azure cloud. It would remain within the United States. We would be looking at a government cloud. They have different types of clouds based on the requirements of the data and the organization that is utilizing the cloud. So first responder data might fit well in the cloud as a government cloud, but it might fit in a different type of cloud environment because of the type of data. The backup of the data remains in the cloud. So Azure has its own backup solution. The thing about our particular solution is that the cloud would only be hosting some processes and some data. We have to determine, and we've done this, what processes that are going on in the town have sister processes or processes that are associated with the primary process that you can't break apart. You have to have them on the same server in the same location. So there are certain processes, we'll call the SoftWrite financial management process a cloud server, because there are no other processes, no other hooks that particular solution needs to work with. So we don't have to worry about breaking something that has a process running within our data center at the high school or at the CEA and having the other half of the process in the cloud. I know it's a little confusing, but we are looking at migrating approximately about 25 different servers or processes to the cloud. What that will do, it will improve security, and it will also allow me to recover some of the labor of our systems analysts, because when we migrate from our internal data centers to the cloud, there is something called a Hyper-V. So it's a virtual environment. That virtual environment is something that my systems analyst manages right now. When that goes to the cloud, that virtual platform will now be managed by Microsoft. So my systems analyst will pick up some labor hours to do other things or do things that he's doing better and more efficiently.
So these clouds are still secure enough so that some nefarious third party can't come in and disrupt them.
I would say that they're as secure as what our internal data centers are. We have to make sure that our patch management and that our security appliances are all up to par on every single day. You know, the patches are there. They're as secure as what we are. They probably have more targets, a larger target on their back than what we do, just because it's Microsoft. But I feel comfortable that based on the last 5 or 6 years of the Azure environment, that they're very secure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Mike, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say I did get a chance to listen to Ron's presentation to Capital, and he did a great job of, you know, it's obviously we can't just sort of flip a switch and go to Azure. So along the way, there are some, correct me if I misspeak on this, Ron, but there are some capital investments we need to make in our current infrastructure that, you know, as we migrate to the cloud, is just a necessary part of that migration and that transition to the cloud. But it's you know, it's a really, he laid it out very well. You know, progressing over the next couple of years, how this whole strategy is going to be implemented, and I didn't see anybody on Capitol, really blink an eyelash at the presentation. They seem pretty happy with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The more resources that we put in the cloud, the more that has to be available to us. So the high availability has to be there, and we will be achieving that with this capital phase 1 approach that we're taking. So we'll be increasing our firewalls, we'll be increasing our internet connectivity, not only the amount of connections, but our bandwidth. So there is something with our current hardware and solution that we can achieve, that we will achieve going forward with this new phase 1 approach. It gives us high availability. So those 25 processes and those 100 cloud-based applications that we leverage will always be available to the entire town, every single department that has them.
Anything else? Go ahead.
The other
Ron,
part of the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say the only other part of the central infrastructure budget that was worth noting, and that was about a $14,000 increase with regards to service level agreements and operational costs across all of the areas that budget encapsulates. So that was the other part that was inclusive of the $112,000 increase. I don't know if you need any discussion on the school's IT budget. That budget has been developed between myself, the curriculum director, and Susan Owen. We've kind of broken it apart based on front end and back end. Not a lot has changed with that from my perspective. There have been, I believe, a few applications that the curriculum director has initiated and implemented. But other than that, the only improvement from my perspective with regards to something new was, in fact, something called Follett, which is they use it for they use it for their student information system, their Aspen database. They also have a solution in the library called Destiny, which is owned by Follett. And this other solution that I'm looking at for IT is actually a inventory system, so that we can do a better job at inventorying all of the hardware that we have using barcode readers and electronic imaging versus an Excel spreadsheet, which is how we do it now.
Anybody have any particular questions about the school IT side? All right. Anything further for Ron? Chris?
I just wanted to take a second and say, for those of you who haven't seen this over the last 8 years, Ron was one of my first major hires, recruiting successes here, and he has taken us from no IT system whatsoever to where we are today. He has dragged some people through cybersecurity training, frightened the shit out of all of us about emails, and made sure that we're doing things better. He really has been a tremendous asset to the town of Cohasset, and it's one of those jobs where the work's really never done, right? Because you build the fiber loop. We have a town fiber loop thanks to the work that Ron and his team have done, which and became a backbone for COVID and allowing at-home learning and at-home like what we're doing right now. None of this would have been possible without the work that was done. So, and that's also because the committee's advisory capital bought in, understood what was going on, and of course made sure that we hit progress points. So the work that's been done and the work that continues to be done is foundational to everything else we do. We wouldn't be on this Zoom call right now if we didn't have an IT system like we do. And I want to thank Ron for all the work he's been doing and his entire team to keep this place going.
I appreciate the kind words, and I'll also say, it takes a village, and it takes all of you to understand, what it is that the town needs and how to get to where we need to be. These steps that I've laid out, I believe, are going to bring Cohasset, out into the 2030 range with regards to being able to adopt solutions in a flexible, dynamic way. And it requires, your buy-in, Capital's buy-in, department heads, and all of that. And I really appreciate the support that I've gotten from Cohasset.
Well, I think we all realize how critically important it's gotten. IT is to any enterprise, and we appreciate that. I know I try to keep up with my cybersecurity quizzes and what have you. So as I'm sure do we all. So thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. We should be able to let you go. Thank you. And move on to our next item. I had asked Don and Chris to give us kind of the miscellaneous budget, the overall budget items. Good night, Ron.
Good night.
And that's what comes up next on the agenda. And I know that Don had forwarded some materials that got circulated. So Don, why don't you go ahead and tell us what we should be looking at and walk through these items. And at some point, I think we should at least touch on the ultimate question, which is, if not touching on it now, then touching on it soon, is when we roll up all these budgets, can we produce our statutorily required balanced budget? So that's a matter of, I think, concern. So I don't mean to be a downer, but go ahead, let us have it.
All right, so I prepared a memo and sent that along to you folks, and I'll just briefly touch on them, even though you had a chance to read. So again, one of the meetings, we kind of walked through the forecast and how we get to essentially the net new revenue numbers and things like that. And the first part of it are shared budgets, and then the remaining is broken down into townwide departments and school department. So the one highlight I have of the school department, again, as I had mentioned, you've already heard the big players in the townwide budget. You've heard DPW, you just heard IT, police, fire. Those are like the four biggest budgets we have. But just one thing to note, something that we've had a continued effort here is putting money into the health department budget for a couple of reasons. One, to right now supplement the drug-free communities grant that we have, which is a 5-year program, $125,000 a year, pays for our program director, a project coordinator, and then funding for programs. The programming are specific age groups, so I believe it's middle school, high school focused. So the supplementing budgets that we have in the general fund can provide for programs outside that, so they can target elementary school programs and things like that. So for now, it's been a kind of a supplementation of the grant, but it's been an effort to be able to, over the life of this grant program, build in, the goal is to build in the salary of the program director into the general fund budget. So at one point, we won't be receiving this grant. We anticipate that we're going to get another 5-year extension on the grant, which would commence in this October. And then the goal would be to have this fully budgeted before the completion of that 5-year extension. And then basically what that would do is free up the grant money to do further programming. And then again, this critical role will be funded within the budget, and then we wouldn't have to rely on the federal or state grant monies to operate this program. So that's, to me, one of the bigger highlights that you haven't heard on the townwide budget. And I can stop there. I see a question already.
Go ahead, Patrick. Patrick,
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my cursor was hiding on me. Just want to make sure I fully understand. Thanks, Don. Just want to make sure I fully understand. We're talking about the Safe Harbor Cohasset grant and the headcount associated with Safe Harbor Cohasset, if I'm correct, right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. Yeah. So if the 5-year plan of rolling the staff costs into our budget is realized properly, then how mechanically does that work? In other words, does the staff still get paid through the grant, but then this allocation of a portion get rolled into their budget somehow for additional costs? Or is literally like a third of the salary going to be paid by the town of Cohasset in year one, you know, up to 3/5 by year 3 and 100% by year 5? How mechanically does it actually work on a dollars basis?
So I guess I'd have to really talk to Nicole about if there's any limitations on obtaining the grant. So there are some requirements of receiving and maintaining the grant. You have to have a project coordinator. There are a number of other things that have to be done, whether it's in paid for by the grant or not. Ultimately, the way I would see it is that we're at about 50% of the salary in the funded so far in the budget. We're not splitting that money at this point yet. It's really literally just there, building in and supplementing the current grant. I would see that once we have the full amount, we would start to pay for that program director strictly out of the general fund budget. And then if allowed by the grant monies, the $125,000 would pay for the project coordinator and any other expenses to support that program. I don't know if I answered that right or.
Well, I think that answers some of the question, but part of it is, for example, if you have a town employee who gets benefits and has post-employment benefits and has pension component to their compensation, it's more than just the annual salary amount. So my guess is that you're building up to be able to fund the full costs of an additional headcount. Is that right?
We already paid for her benefits out of the budget, out of the general fund budget. This is now building in her just the salary alone also.
Okay.
Right now so in addition to the $38,000 we put aside, which is about 50% of the current salary for that position, we are already taking care of the benefits on the general fund side as well.
But she's not receiving them right now through the town.
She is. So grant funded employees are town employees.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's just a bucket of money of where they're coming from. And some grants allow you to pay for benefits out of them. Some don't.
I see.
We over the years we've shifted some costs onto the budget side so that they could free up more money for their programs out of the grant. So that was one of the first steps we did a year or two ago, was taking on the benefit piece in the budget. And now we've been making a focus on building in and adding on for the personnel cost to eventually be fully in the general fund budget as well.
Okay, I understand.
So moving on, the other just 4 kind of highlights I have, which fall under the shared budgets. South Shore Voc Tech, that assessment increased about 20% to about $152,000. Their assessment is based on just purely enrollment. They have a calculation, come up with their budget number and then allocate it based on enrollment by participating community. Norfolk County Pension.
I had a question, probably one I ask every year, but I saw Fran's hand first. Fran, go ahead.
What's the per capita cost for the scholarship money there at the Votech?
I don't scholarship money. I'm not.
No, I mean the tuition.
Tuition.
Yeah.
Per cap, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get it to you.
Do you know how many students we have over there?
I have both of those in the email that I don't have access right at my fingertips, but I can respond in email to that.
Just wondering what $159,000, $152,000 buys us.
So Fran, part of that cost, the town pays some money every year just to be part of the
Right, I understand that. Yeah.
And then we haven't had many kids, unfortunately, and it's that said, it's great to see that we have some. And they actually just, not to go on too much of a tangent here, the Votech just was accepted to the MSBA school funding program. So they'll be doing some repairs to the building itself, which actually cost us less as a result, which is good.
Well, I see some great kids coming out of all of the regional Votech schools down at Maritime. I'm really impressed with what they, the caliber of the kids that come out of there and the things that they know. So I'd like to see more kids from Cohasset go in there. But I'm just curious as to what it costs per student to send them.
I'm aware that I knew this at one point, but I don't recall. Why are VOTEC costs in the town budget and not in the school budget? And has that been a change in recent memory?
You know, this is a model. I took this model over from my predecessor in the long range planning group. I'm not quite sure, Rob, why the VOTEC is a separate standalone shared budget and not school related.
Okay.
And just, I did find, I was able to pull up the email quickly. So for Cohasset, per pupil cost about $18,000. And we have 7 students, it looks like.
Excellent.
Or 8 students. And then, so moving on, the next item, I know for county pension, that increased about 230,000 or 7.3%. The pension is based on actuarial evaluation that is done every 2 years. So that was a set number from last year. They every valuation, they set the annual assessment for the next 2 years. So we will be getting another valuation, another 2-year assessment sometime next calendar year. Health insurance.
Can I ask another question there, Don?
Yep.
So if they do an actuarial valuation every 2 years, we should see whatever the increase is going to be in year 1, and then a 0 increase in year 2, and then another increase in year 3 when they do it again?
No. So they no. So again, this is year 2, and we're going up 7.3%. Usually their expected amortization is about a 7.3% increase to each participating community. Again, because evaluation is done every 2 years, they only recognize gains and losses every 2 years, essentially. So they go through, they do the recalculation. Again, we're part of a county system, so they do this calculation, and then it's allocated based on payroll. So again, at any given time, based on hiring or the staffing level at a certain time, that allocation can change. You can see some swings there. So yeah, you're never going to see the same number for 2 consecutive years.
One can hope, but okay. Any other questions about pension, or Don, do you want to keep moving?
Sure. Yeah. So health insurance, we estimated 7% increase. That's about a $450,000 increase to about 5.8 million. I believe our rates have come in just slightly lower than that, but not enough at this point that we felt was significant enough to change the budget. Over the last couple of years, we've received a withholding holiday and a partial withholding holiday. So we've had some surpluses in our healthcare, which we've been carrying for years, which has been a good driver and a contributing factor to essentially our OPEB contribution plan. But over the last couple of years, with seeing the trend rate, we don't believe that surplus will be as healthy anymore. So again, even though our base estimate was at 7, it's coming in slightly lower. We didn't think it was conservative to change that number. Be happy to answer any questions on that before I get to this last item. See, nothing. The last item, risk management. This is just another one of our insurances, heavily out of the $400 and something thousand. It's heavily weighted towards a property casualty insurance. We also have a small, relatively small, about $70,000 of police and fire insurance. And our reps at Meijer had us estimated about a 7.5% increase. We have yet to get those numbers. I feel like we usually get solid numbers for the property casualty later in March, if I remember correctly. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have better than expected, better than 7.5, but we're still waiting. And I didn't note it here, but just another thing that could change in the next few weeks, up until, us finalizing this, is our state aid numbers, which, we won't have final numbers for probably another month or so. We saw a very small change from the governors to the second round of funding, and it's not anything to really get excited about. Last time, by the time we got to the final state budget, we had a net decrease. So it's not really prudent to make any budget adjustments based on the multiple stages of the state budgeting process.
Just to piggyback on Don's, I was on the phone with someone at Connor's office today, and their big push at the moment is for Chapter 90 increases. That's roads and infrastructure funding for localities, and perhaps local aid. But we get such a fairly small amount of the local aid. We'll take any Chapter 90 money. That'll just help with roads and roads and drainage and everything else we do. But as Don pointed out last year, we actually we actually retreated a little bit between the governor's budget in the end, because we got hit with a number of other costs for charter schools that we've never seen before. Hoping that doesn't happen this time. So we're staying conservative.
Mike?
Hey, Don, just to go a little off script on you, how are the snow costs tracking relative to what was budgeted? It just so happened, I think both our big storms happened on Sundays, right? Which means it's more expensive.
Yeah, this is definitely the most snow I've seen in the last few years related to snow and ice costs. We're right now about $150,000, $160,000 over budget on our snow and ice.
Okay, thanks.
And I believe we just paid some plow drivers from the last storm, so I think we're caught up with invoices, but sometimes the salt and sand companies also lag a little bit behind the storms and billing. So right now we're at about 160, if I remember correctly, from this morning.
Okay, thanks.
Tonight's not going to cost us for plowing, but it's definitely going to cost us for salting, because we have the trucks out tonight salting. So.
Anything further? All right. So thanks, Don. As an agenda item, I had us send us review of warrant articles. That's sort of the process of monitoring the warrant as it develops. So we're keeping up with doing our job. Chris, how's it looking generally? And I don't think I've seen a copy of it yet, even if it's a little embryonic. Maybe by the next meeting we can see just what it looks like, gaps and all. But why don't you just run us through what's significant now, what's coming, what was coming and may not be coming, if anything.
Tracy and I passed each other in the night, so I have a version, but I haven't circulated. I have to take one more look at it. So what I will tell you is that the warrant is now up. I'll give you a couple of highlights from last night and where the board is. So there were two citizen petitions I know which are scheduled for next week. So one of them is a vote on any project over $1 million, regardless of its impact on the need for an exclusion. The other is for citizen remote participation at town meeting. The select board last night voted to adopt that as to create its own version of that citizen petition to put it on the warrant. So that will also, there'll be another like a mirror article that the selectmen will introduce as their own to petition the state for remote participation. There's going to be, regardless of the debate that may take place on town meeting floor, there's going to be a lot of work because there's only a handful of towns. There's a handful of other towns that are actually actively looking at this. At the same time, the legislature is going to, have to be convinced. I think everybody understands there'll be a lot of conversation. So that's one change. The town has been accepted in the state revolving fund for if you remember last year, the granular activated carbon filter at the well field. If you remember the discussions about PFAS, the forever chemical that has been found all over the world. Literally, I read a story of how it was found on the top of Mount Everest. And since no one is using Teflon pans up there, it's obviously in the environment, right? So And the good news is that Cohasset was a pilot, took part in a pilot project with the state. So we were identifying PFAS issues early, which has put us in a great place for state aid. So we've been accepted into the revolving fund, which means that our interest costs are already going to be reduced from the projected 4 to 2 at least, and maybe down to 0. And it's also a possibility that we'll get a reduction in the premium in the actual principal. So we're still not sure of that number. So that original bond was for 3.6, and there was another separate chlorine filter that was going to be put on for another 3+. So the state to take part in the program, we're going to have to put that on this warrant for when to rescind the old bond issue which hasn't been ever issued yet, and instead do the state revolving fund for a little bit more. They requested 10% additional authorization just in case of cost overruns. So there'll be a warrant article for 4.4 to take part in the state revolving fund. So by the way, even if we did go to 4.4, it would still cost less than we would have at 3.6 with a higher interest cost. So so that's going to be on the warrant. We've talked a little bit about the Cook Estates, the septic failure at the Cook Estates. The Board of Public Health has required them to hook into sewers, and there'll be 1 or 2 articles on the warrant for the Cook Estates to A, be added to the sewer district, and B, to authorize a betterment and the construction of the connection from the septic fields up across to a pumping station on the grounds of the Deer Hill School property. And that will be paid for by the Cook Estates folks. So the wording of that is being finalized. So so those are the things that are newish. And I would think that we're scheduling next Tuesday to have both the Board of Public Health in front of the select board to talk about this, and also to talk about the state revolving fund article. Since the advisory committee is already supposed to be there for the joint citizens petition, if you wanted to, we can incorporate those both into that conversation. Because I don't think either of those are terribly controversial, but there is technical briefing to be had on both of them. So, and the select board will hear those both next week, just to officially put them on the board. Otherwise, Don and I have to sit down and finalize what's going into the stabilization funds. Put the final touches on the annual renewal of the revolving funds, finalize the parameters on this new revolving fund that we want to do for building permit. Building inspections after hours with the 2 big projects in the pipeline already, the Classen Brand redevelopment, and then this 19-unit commercial condo complex going up on the hill behind the self-storage facility. There's going to be work after hours on weekends that the developers will pay for, but we have to be able to fund. And we don't have a revolving fund vehicle for that at this point. Because we never had to have it. So we'll put the finish touch on those. So you'll be able to start banging out at those as early as next week, I hope. Those particular warrant articles.
Okay. Fran?
That's sweet. That's 2 major additions to the sewage system in town, from the Stop and Shop area and the new building there in the Cook Estate, top of Sawyer Street. How close to full capacity are we at our sewage treatment plant and this new residential commercial / is there going to be any residential up there back at the storage area, or is it just strictly commercial?
No, it's just commercial. They're commercial. They're like over on Derby Street, Fran. There's a little commercial, the little commercial that I just saw there for the first time. It's like those. They're like their offices. So they all do have bathrooms in them, which I mean, obviously.
Yeah, and that hillside is nothing but hard pan. I mean, there's no drainage there. So I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, I mean,
do we have sewage capacity in town to handle all this new stuff?
Well, they're not in the sewer district, Fran, so they're going to have to build their own septic, because the hillside is that part of 3A is not in the sewer district, so they can't connect even if they want to. Cook Estates, there's good enough capacity for that, and the sewer commission already determined that the Stop and Shop complex was also sufficient capacity for that. That said, I did talk to Brian about that. they're zeroing in on where they have some I&I infiltration and inflow, and they think they know where it is. Now they have to figure out how to identify the specific locations,
Yeah.
pipe, and fix it. So the good news is that they've done a lot of work on that, and they've actually narrowed down the particular problems to a very discrete area. And hopefully we'll be able to address that in the coming year or so. That said, the town is still running below the average capacity, but it's higher than it. The storm, some of the big nor'easter we had last year, for example, pushed a lot of water into the system. And it seems to have come from that particular area they're focusing on. So, but the answer was yes, there's capacity for those projects.
I'm just concerned, we must be getting close to our capacity. I mean, this system, as old as it is, and I don't recall what the initial capacity was, but that we must be getting awfully close.
Well, there is room. I mean, what the town is approaching is the 80% rule. You're supposed to stay with it, less than 8, leave a 20% cushion. And if you get above that, above 80%, you have to do other regulatory filings with the state. So there is still capacity, and the plant was just remodeled. The filtration systems, were just replaced during the pandemic. Remember?
Yep.
So they're in top working order. And one of the other nice things is that the newer construction that's going in has a lot more low flow devices. So that does help.
That's a plus, right? Thank you, Chris.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. So the item that's on the agenda next is liaison reports and preview of the school department budget as it's beginning to roll up. And I have some questions about I want to check in before we're done here about our agenda items for upcoming meetings to make sure we're on track to consider everything and vote some things and provide some statements for town meeting so that we can be effective. Although I think we can do that after the warrant goes to print, once we've voted on stuff in terms of crafting anything that we want to say as a committee. So why don't we talk about liaison reports? Why don't we start with the schools, since they are actually specified. I know that there was a preliminary meeting with our liaisons. Maybe we could get a sense of where things are at.
I'll start. Mike and Jean can pipe in whenever. So Mike, Jean, and I just had a meeting with Craig, and chair of the school committee, and Patrick Sullivan, the superintendent, and Susan Owen, the business manager. And it was, they had supplied us with some additional information regarding enrollment status, and didn't get as much clarity on number of faculty as we had wanted, but it was a very productive meeting, and we did have a chance to run through their capital asks as well. The bottom line is that they're over right now. They're at a 4.68% increase ask, and the town is proposing a 3.047. So they did come down. They eliminated one position. They are not settled with their contract negotiations. So that's kind of a moving target. And I do think it was made clear that they have some homework to do. A lot of the increase in just the basic rollover costs from FY22 to FY23 are based on the fact that through grant process and CARES fund relief and so forth, they added staff. I think 3.5 is the number that I've come up with, but it might be a little bit more than that are now forming part of that baseline.
When you say 3.5, you mean 3.5 FTEs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have 2 custodians, a social worker at the middle school, and the director of digital technology were added, all on grants, but now they have to be paid for. So that's problematic. But that said, it was a good conversation. And Mike and Jean, if you guys want to fill in some of the spaces between the lines, that'd be great.
Sure. There was another half position for a nurse at the middle school because they have, in their efforts to completely separate the two schools, which I strongly supported. They needed to have somebody on that side of the building in case the kids needed some kind of medical help, whether it was a Band-Aid or whatever they needed. Because before, the middle school students had to walk the whole length of the building through the high school to get to the nurse's office. And now the nurse's office is a little bit different environment because of COVID. So I don't disagree with some of the things that they did, but I do disagree with the way it was handled, because I don't believe a conversation happened about the fact that they needed more cleaning help because of COVID and that the positions could go away. I don't believe that that conversation was had. So we did have, as Mary said, it was a very cordial conversation. I think that they were pleasantly surprised, as were we. There was no contentious fighting at the table. But we made it very clear. I believe that my last words were, you have some more work to do. And we had another conversation also about how we have limited funds here because of our tax base. And they already get a generous share of that tax base. So they can't expect to take more away so that they can have what they want. We talked about wants versus needs. So we'll see what they come back with. And Mary, what was the date that you told them that you wanted to meet prior to?
I think we talked about next week. I still don't have a sense, Chris, I don't know if you know or Dawn, you know, they had, in their original budget calendar, they had scheduled a public hearing for March 2nd, which was not noticed.
Didn't
Not happen. They do not have a meeting tonight, and I have not seen any notice for when their public hearing is. So I'm not sure when that's coming up, but we did indicate that we would like to connect after tonight's meeting with them. And just to add a little more detail for folks that haven't seen their budget, and I can certainly send it around, they do have some additional staffing requests for another grade 2 teacher, which is solely based on enrollment. They've got 20 more kids coming up to the 2nd grade, a math specialist in the middle school based on some apparently rather poor MCAS scores at that level. And then the rest have to do with supplies and materials. And there's an effort to reduce the full day kindergarten fees because eventually the schools are going to have to absorb that all in the budget. So those are the main items.
Yeah, and I would just say from a capital, we also talked about the capital budget. Right now, they're requesting just over $1 million of capital requests, and there's 1.8 million total available for the town. So we actually did identify and talked with them about 4 different items: the field lights, the scoreboards, which we asked them if there was any outreach issue with the some of the sports groups to see if maybe there could be some fundraising that might help defray some of those costs. I know that's something that happens in a lot of towns. And then there were also 2 items to redo the road from Pond Street as well as the sidewalk and curbing. That we just wondered if whether or not, if there was a road being paved in the schools, cannot that not be part of the town's overall strategy of repaving different areas? And so, if those 4 items were, taken out or defrayed, that'd be about $450,000 off of that $1 million ask for capital. So hopefully they, maybe thought about some of that stuff and can come back with, something more in the $600,000 range for capital versus $1 million.
Quick question. Has the school department presented the capital budget yet?
They have.
They have.
Yeah, I was on that call.
Okay. I have a question, but I saw Patrick's hand first.
A question about they mentioned reduction or elimination of one staff position. Is that the position we heard about earlier in IT that's being shifted over to the town side?
Not to my knowledge. They actually had in their original budget worksheet a computer teacher that they subsequently took out and said that would potentially be for next year, but it was an in the classroom position. It wasn't a system administrator.
Okay. And then second question, the ask or increase for a second grade teacher based on enrollment, how does that work when you have a spike year of a high enrollment in one grade? I think this happened when my son was in elementary school years ago, but they had one extra kindergarten teacher. So right now, is there an extra first grade teacher? And next year they won't need that extra first grade teacher that could be shifted to second grade? Or
actually, that's the one thing that's very clear from their numbers, at least what I saw the enrollment data. That teacher, it looks like, is going to have to stay because the numbers are higher coming up. But sometimes, Patrick, a teacher will follow you can just bump the teacher up along with that class.
Right.
They progress through.
Makes
And
sense.
sometimes if the teacher is licensed properly, they could even move down. If there was a third grade teacher if the third grade numbers were smaller, then they could have the third grade teacher move to second grade. We did that a couple of times when I was on the school committee. I don't know exactly what their numbers look like, but as Mary said, they're looking at a bubble of 20 kids in second grade. So
That's higher than this year's first grade?
So what I can tell you right now is the enrollment for kindergarten in fiscal year 23 is 127, grade 1 is 127, and grade 2 that is moving up is 127, but then you have that exiting class is only 107. So you've got more kids coming up down upstream, I guess you would say. So they have to add a class. I mean, that's just the way that is.
Yeah, Patrick, they said, right now, I guess they want to target 20 to 21 kids in a class versus 25 to 26.
They can't, contractually, they can't do 25 to 26. The maximum that they can have is 24, except at the middle high school. The numbers can be a little bit higher there. They don't need as much supervision. They don't need help, getting their snowsuits on and putting boots and mittens. And I mean, it all comes into the whole picture, and it's all instructional too. It's getting them ready for going out in the world. So
do you have confidence in these enrollment numbers when 127 is the same number for 3 grades in a row? That doesn't sound right to me.
I do, only because they also backed it up with all the state numbers. So yeah, I do. I mean, that's also pretty easy to double check.
Yeah, there's an organization called NESDEC, and they do projections on enrollment every year. And it's an independent group. It has nothing to do with the schools, and they do the whole state. So their numbers are pretty right on.
Okay.
Now, maybe some people will take their kids out and send them to private school. We never know that until it happens. And it wouldn't be 20 at that group, at that age group. It might be, we've seen as many as 20 kids leave at the high school level. And then there were a couple of years where the private schools opened middle schools and we lost kids. A lot of them came back, but they left. So then we didn't need the same amount of teachers in those years. Right. And adjustments were made then.
Thanks.
I've got a couple of quick questions. One, Mary, you had said that currently there is a position from the town of 3.0, let's call it 5%, and the school department of 4.7%. Do we know, applying arithmetic, what that comes out to in a number?
Well, the town offered, I think, 660. Their budget right now shows 1.05 million. So
But that's not their budget. That's the change in their budget.
that's the increase, correct.
Right. Yeah, because I think it would be helpful to talk, we get a sheet that says, well, this is how much the overage is, but that doesn't tell us about, some of the other things that you've mentioned, like positions that have been grant funded and are sliding over into additional positions. And I mean, there are changes all through that budget. So it might be good, not necessarily the substitute, but to add on, the total number of dollars that is being consumed on, to support, the school department, and how many, what the ranges are for additional dollars. The other thing that might be helpful in framing these budget discussions is the magnitude of the school departments and every department's share of what we call the shared budget. I mean, we're having another conversation about moving, somebody who sits in a school, works in a school, does most of his work in a school, and shifting it to the town budget. Well, there are a lot of things. The insurance costs, liability insurance costs, all sorts of things live in our shared budget that make, if you were to budget out the town's budget, I mean, it's convenient to put it there because they're services that are shared. But if you're trying to I'm going to use words improperly, and I apologize, particularly to Don. If you're doing cost accounting and you're trying to break these things out into cost centers, you would break that shared budget apart and the real number that would apply to a working school department. And it's an appropriate number. I mean, school departments cost what they cost, and we need to have a good one. And it costs, money to have the things that you need. But to assess it correctly, and I'm not asking Don to do a 52 pickup on all of these costs, but just some awareness to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that the costs matter. And when we shift things out of any department into a shared budget, we're creating a budget that's not, a number that isn't accurate anymore, without an asterisk that says, oh, by the way, plus 58% of X million dollars that we call a shared budget. So just as sort of part of the conversation to help everyone who has to vote on this budget understand, the dollar flows. The shared budget isn't some magic budget that lives outside of the schools. It's generated, probably 40, 55, 45 internally. That's more of an observation than a question, I suppose. But at least no one's saying I'm radically wrong. So I'll go with that.
Hey, Rob, if I may, so I'm looking at the sheet that they gave us, just outlining the delta between what they asked and what's been offered. So it looks like it's about a $355,000 difference between what they're asking and, at the 4.7% versus what the town is offered at 3.05%.
Okay, well, that gives us, an order of, magnitude about what we're talking about. And I think you probably all think the same. It's easy for us to fall into a pattern of saying us and them, because we're the town's advisory committee, they're the school department. But I think, and I'm glad that the meetings are cordial and professional. They should be. There's no excuse for them not to be. But from time to time, we should all recognize that we are all we. They are we are they. Dollars are fungible. Everybody, then there's a need to get to a place. And I think language sometimes matters. So I'm going to say, that and just let it go. But I'd hate to get into a food fight over us and them, because, we all have the same goal, and we all better have the same goal: an excellent school department with, a budget that statutorily has to balance, and a town that has to deliver all the other services. So, all right, soapbox over. Sorry. Mary?
Just quick question for Dawn and Chris, I guess. One of the conversations we did have is they've had a pretty significant increase in sped tuitions with, I think, at least one residential placement, which makes a massive difference in their budget, of course. There is the sped stabilization fund. Has there been any, Dawn, have you been able to do any reading on the way that policy was written to see if they could access that at all?
I'm gonna pull it up now.
Okay.
But no, I have not had a chance to. And a page or two document, I believe. So let me look at it. From what I remember,
I mean, we
it's
don't need
more-
it right now, but.
But from what I remember, the way this is technically supposed to work is more of a during the year scenario where you're halfway through the fiscal year and all of a sudden you have an incoming student who requires significant services. So, you didn't plan for this extra enrollment of, severe special need, whatever it may be $100,000 increase in your budget just for that one student. That money was supposed to be able to be voted by the select board and the school committee to then be transferred to use for those purposes. I don't think it's really used for plugging a hole in next year's budget. But again, I'll look at it. I can send that out. I believe it should be on the website somewhere. It's in our budget document. But I'll take a quick read through that and I can get back to you guys.
Okay.
There are specifics on how much of it you can access, how much you have to leave in the fund. I do recall that because it all happened while I was on the committee. You can't deplete the fund. Sometimes the assessment on the student happens after the school year starts, or, there are different ins and outs of how you can access the money. So, and as you said, Don, it's not a huge, hard to understand document. So it should be pretty easy to understand.
Yep.
The only,
All right.
the only,
Go ahead,
addendum,
Chris.
the only addendum I'll put on here is we've been successfully able to negotiate these out before getting to town meeting and everybody being on the same page. And I'm very hopeful that will happen. This is so far later in the game, settling this than I have been in a little while. When I first got here, it was January and I was dropped into the middle of the process and it's like, okay. And we did make it work even then. So, I've talked to Craig McClellan too. I've had a sidebar conversations and said we're open to doing whatever we can. I mean, we don't have $400,000 just sitting around. I wish we did. It's not there. And we end up in a zero-sum game. And I don't want to be, in a zero-sum game if we don't have to be, if we can find ways of, politely and collegially working things out. One-time costs, we have found creative ways over the last several years to plug holes to get us from one year to the next. And I'm confident we can do that. And again, if Don Mike can help in any way, Gene and Mike and Mary, just let us know. I think, we're obviously, again, by the way, the position we keep talking about here, that does free up some money potentially for schools. We'd like to be able to find a way to get through this. And also, it's because we don't want to go to, I've not seen what happens when you go to town meeting floor without agreement on a budget. I'd rather not.
You don't want to go there.
I don't think anybody wants to see that. So we still have a little time. And also, even going into a three-way, meeting with the school committee, advisory committee, and select board without this kind of getting closer could be interesting. So whatever we can do, we're there to help.
What is
I thought Gene and Mary did a nice job of reminding them that grant positions weren't intended to be permanent positions. So maybe that's a message that will resonate with them, as time goes on.
Well, we also had the conversation about overrides and how it's not appropriate to have an override to cover salaries. So if there was any thought in anyone's mind, either on that committee or in the community, they need to hear that that is not going to happen because it's inappropriate and it only solves the problem for 1 year. And the problem will never go away because then we own the employees. So, and I don't think that they really understood that because they thanked us for our institutional knowledge, basically, and for explaining some things that they really didn't have a full understanding of.
Yeah, if we like our AAA rating, operational overrides are not going
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Nice credit rating you have there.
We talked tonight. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
No, you continue.
I was going to say, as we've already discussed tonight, Don was talking about how we're building in, the safe harbor person. Several years ago, we did the same thing with FEMA funded grant fire. We have more firefighters we have more budgeted firefighters today than we've had in 20 years because we planned. Chief Sylvia prepared a winning FEMA grant, and we were able to get up there. We've not been able to hold it 24, unfortunately, for a whole variety of reasons, but we're budgeted for it. But we built it in over 3 years because you can't just drop 2 full-time people in the budget and say, hey, here we are, because we're not Needham or some other place where they're building TripAdvisor headquarters all the time, or even Hingham, right? And they're having financial problems in Hingham too, even though they've been building like crazy as well. That was one of the things I said also to the folks at the schools. I said, look, if you're trying to build the people in because you decided that after COVID, you really need these extra people for some reason, well, we got to find a way to ratchet it up, because we don't have a pot of money to just throw and suddenly add 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 people. It's just we're not structured that way. I wish we were. And that said, if we can help bridge it, or if there's ways of plugging things, we can be creative. I mean, that's how we got to that's how we've done things last few years. And again, I keep repeating myself, so I apologize, but we're there. Whatever you need.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry, Mary. I did just read through that quickly, and again, I'm happy for you guys to read this on your own, because I'm very black and white when it comes to these things. Maybe a little too black and white sometimes. But the purpose of the Special Ed Reserve Fund is to provide for payment of unbudgeted, unforeseen special ed expenses in any year without forcing cuts to other school services during that year. So it's during the year, and in order to request the transfer out, the school department would have to provide a report comparing the aggregate expense of 6 special ed line items, forecast that for the remaining year compared to what was originally budgeted to even request that. So it really is an in-year budgeting tool to help not have to force cuts or other reductions during that given year.
And what's the maximum that fund?
I didn't hear what you said, Mary.
No, there's an odd reverb. What is the maximum that can stay in the fund?
Well, there's a maximum of 2% of net school spending, and we're just about at that max. And you can only take out 200,000 in any given fiscal year, and you cannot exceed what was it? You cannot exceed 300,000 in 2 consecutive years.
Yeah.
So if you had to take out 200,000 this year, you'd be limited to only 100,000 next year if the same issue occurred again.
Okay. So because we're almost at the limit, and this is again just one big pot of money that we're dropping into other little buckets, does that money then revert back to the town, to the general fund if it's not used, or if it's over the limit? No.
No, that to me would stay there until it was ever used. Again, net school spending increases every year, so that max is going to increase. And right now, since we're at the max, I wouldn't plan on contributing anything additional at this point. It does earn investment earnings on that money, so we have seen gains in addition to previous contributions, but we are pretty close. I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but I do have it in some of my materials. So yeah,
I think Susan mentioned that too, that it was pretty close to 400.
And just to piggyback on that, I'm sorry, Jane.
No, go ahead.
If and again, I've looked at the projections too. If there's a residential outplacement, that's a very expensive item, right? And even you really can't plan for those, right? They're not plannable because they're nightmare scenarios, right? And I don't mean that. I mean that from a fiscal point of view. I'm sorry, I don't mean to characterize anything else. It's an unplannable scenario, and so policies are meant to put guardrails on, and as Don well points out, at the same time, the money's there for emergency use, right? And if this gets, if there's a way to get, if special ed really is the core of a very unique special ed scenario is the core, and the state will eventually, if they catch up, right? What is the reimbursement right now? 75%, something like that, right? So if we can help bridge 1 year to get us to the next year when it's a less of a problem, that's a solvable problem. We just, it can't be that plus 3.5 other head counts and then $100,000 here and $500,000 there. It's got to be, we can resolve it if it's something like that. Like I think I'm prepared to go to the board and say, look, we got to do smart. You got to be creative sometimes if we got to get stuff over the hurdle.
And as I think I hinted at when we started this conversation, we try our best to provide services to our special kids to the best of our ability. And sometimes something goes awry and we realize that we can't service these kids in-house. So it may be somebody who they're just watching. They don't know if they're going to need residential services. That conversation wasn't clear because it's really not appropriate to get deep dive details on special ed students.
No.
It never has been. People always ask questions about it, and it's just often inappropriate. That's the end of that soapbox for me. But also, I asked a very general question, and I got exactly what I wanted, which was a very general answer, because we have not heard anything about negotiations with the union. And I asked where they were in the negotiations, and they said they were about halfway. I asked how they were going, and they said very well. And that was all I needed to know. And I said I was most interested because we have not heard anything about the negotiations, and it's concerning. You know, there should be some kind of communication about it, and there's been not a word. So I was happy with the answer.
Patrick?
Well, isn't it better than having the teachers pamphleting and sending notes home with the students?
And having the
So I think
students.
that's all good news, not hearing stuff we've
Very
heard in the
positive.
past. So.
A very positive development.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it might make some sense. Don, I saw you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I took a look. As of December, the balance in that special ed reserve fund was $503,000, just $18,000 short of the max.
Okay. With respect to the remaining agenda item for liaison reports, I thought it might make sense to talk about them in the context of upcoming meetings. I missed the meeting yesterday evening with Water and Sewer. I'll catch up with Chris or Mary and get the substance of that. We're scheduled to have 2 meetings next week. A joint meeting with the select board on the Tuesday, the 15th, regarding citizens petitions, and on Wednesday, the 16th, general warrant articles and a report from the town hall building committee. And I've seen some correspondence that they'll be able to join us at the beginning of our meeting next Wednesday. General warrant, so that gives us a lot of scope. I'll do the agendas in ways that will enable us to have a fairly wide-ranging conversation across everything we've talked about, what we've received to date, and ask the administration for any concerns that we have about, the budget as it comes together, getting, within a number, making sure that the priorities are funded appropriately. And then on the 22nd, we have a joint meeting with capital, budget, and CPC, followed the next, that's on a Tuesday, followed the next night by a capital meeting of our own. And I think that was Mike's suggestion. I think it was a really good suggestion because we were all in favor of it, that we should have that joint meeting and come together again, not to rehash things we've all heard, but to make our recommendations as the advisory committee on the capital requests. And I think I'd add the community preservation request that. So I have, and pardon me for being a little not understanding my own memo, but I have school department meetings down on the 29th and the 5th, both of which are Tuesdays. Are both of those joint with the select board?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so that does make sense. I think we'll continue to put the school budget on our agendas for the next, not the joint meetings, but our next meeting on the 16th to monitor progress. Because by the time we get to the 29th and the 5th, we're getting very late in the process. So I think if there are specific things that we want to speak to as a committee in that ongoing process, we should. So I'll have that on that agenda. Mike, you'll be continuing to participate with capital budget, and we'll talk prior to those meetings to to make sure our discussion is productive, and also with CPC. And I know Meg is on the list for CPC as well. And I know they had meetings yesterday evening as well to consider grants. And I'm going to have to recuse myself from discussion on at least one of the capital requests. The Historical Society is asking for money for something, and I'm involved in that. So it's just really just a way of sloughing off work on this committee. So, so unless anybody else has a liaison related report, I don't. Yes, no. Hearing none. We don't have any minutes for this evening. I did not reasonably anticipate any topics. We don't have an executive session. So did I miss anything? Is there anything that, obviously, if anybody wants to weigh in on the upcoming agendas, let me know. Mary?
Just a quick question, Chris, what's the, when does the warrant go to the printer?
We have to close it out by the 5th of April. That's the goal.
Okay. Whoa.
That's the goal, is April 5th. So we can get it all bundled up and put together. Remember, we have Patriots Day holiday in between and all. It has to be in everybody's hands a week in advance, but we try to get it ahead a little bit further than that.
Okay.
And with everything going on in the world, we don't want to find out we're having a problem with our printer either. So we'll find out that newsprint or paper is somehow, locked up.
At some point, as a committee, we have to vote on the budget as a whole. So if that's on the 5th, it's on the 5th. But also sometime between when that warrant goes to print and it's locked in, we should probably think about scheduling a separate meeting to talk about which articles we want to be prepared to comment on, which articles will we insist on commenting upon.
It's not till like May.
Yeah, we have tons of time. I mean, that's the thing about that lovely statutory period for notice by constable service, is that it gives us time to have a meeting or two if we choose, with a lot of leisure, so long as we're squared away prior to town meeting. So we'll talk about that later. Does anybody have anything else? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No more lawyer jokes, you guys. That's enough.
Sorry, Rob.
Quite all right. It takes one to know one, I suppose. But all right. Hearing nothing, I would certainly listen to a motion to
So moved.
adjourn. Mary, second.
I got two kids way overdue for bedtime.
I thought I had Mark in there first, so by all means. Then by roll call, Adam Amon.
Aye.
Gina Stino.
Aye.
Mike Barclay.
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy.
Aye.
Mark Maggi. Mary McGoldrick.
Aye.
Rob Hillman. I too am an aye. Our next event is a joint meeting with the Select Board on the Ides of March, the 15th. I'll see you all then.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Mary.
Beware.
Good night.